Hello, everybody. I hope you folks have your thinking hats on, because today we're going to talk about a relatively complicated subject. And we have four gentlemen at the table here who are well versed on this subject, far more so than I, and I'm certain that even I may find myself confused. Fortunately, these gentlemen probably can't tell us all they know, because there's so many secrets in this thing. But and that will help keep it a little simple. So the subject of today is essentially, what should a headphone sound like? This is not an inconsequential question. It's very, very difficult. And I'm going to introduce this by making a little example of it. So if you have an ideal speaker, supposedly flat, and then 2 meters away from it, you put a calibrated measurement microphone and take a reading of pink noise or a sine sweep, you should have a flat line in the end. Now, if you put your body and your head where the microphone was and look at the signal at your eardrum, it will no longer be flat. Okay, we'll just call this the head-related transfer function, but the head-related transfer function is really what happens when sound comes from every direction. It's sort of this general set of all the changes in frequency response that occurs depending on what angle of sound is coming at your head. But the bottom line is that it changes. Your torso gives it a little bit of mid-range gain. The concha bowl of your ear provides some gain at a certain frequency, or at between 2 and 5K roughly. And so the bottom line is by the time the signal gets to the eardrum, it is no longer flat. So then the question becomes, well, how do we compensate for that, and how are we going to get this sound to your ear? And oh, by the way, well, if the sound at your eardrum changes depending on what angle the sound is coming from, what angles are we going to choose? What kind of sound source? Is it in a room with a lot of reverberations? Is this in an anechoic chamber? It's very complicated. Now, back in the day, and up until not too long ago, people like to think that the proper response at the eardrum was the diffuse field response. But I neglected to introduce our members, because I'm about to throw the wrench over into the group here, and so I need to introduce the members, so I'm going to take a break here for half a second. And maybe I'll just let them introduce themselves. They can tell you what they do, and so Paul, would you go ahead and pick up the microphone and turn it on, and we'll just move it down the road here.
Yes, my name is Paul Barton, and I'm the founder and chief designer for PSB Loudspeakers. Maybe we should put a dash in there, PSB Loudspeakers and headphones, because we now make headphones.
Hi everybody, this is Naotaka from Sony Tokyo, and thank you very much to Hertsens for inviting such a very touchy topic panels. Thank you.
Yeah, hey guys, this is Rowan Williams from Philips. I came from Belgium. I'm working on headphones there, mostly on driver design, but I also do some tuning for headphones.
Hello everyone, my name is Tetsuro Oishi. I'm from Telos Acoustics. Probably nobody knows because this is a brand new company started by Mike Ballard. He's the founder and the CEO of the company. But I used to work for Bose and Skull Candy. Both of the companies had a bass-heavy culture. But I left those two companies, and I joined Mike, and we are trying to launch some exciting products for the next year.
So we have in front of us 4 very accomplished and headphone designers who have produced headphones that you have probably heard. So, diffuse field, and is that really a reasonable way to go? I'm going to toss it over to Rowan, because he's thought about that a little bit, and we had a little chat this morning.
Okay, thanks, Tyll. So you mentioned when a loudspeaker engineer makes a measurement on a loudspeaker, they will often put a microphone suspended in the air in front of the speaker or at some angle around the speaker, and they will make that measurement. And that's fairly easy to interpret because when we record audio, we do the same thing with a microphone. We suspend it somewhere in the air, but also unobstructed in the air. But when we design a headphone, we can't put our headphone and put a microphone in front of it, unobstructed in the air, and measure it like that. It doesn't make sense to do that. Why? Because when we wear headphones, we put the driver either just outside the head with a cushion around it, or we stuff it inside our ear canal in the form of an insert. We put an air load in front of the driver, and it affects the way the driver and the headphone or earphone behaves. So we can't measure it in that way. So when we measure headphones, and if we want a measurement that can be interpreted in the way that the headphone sounds, then the headphone needs to be put on a head, a real head or a dummy head, with a microphone somewhere where the eardrum would be. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated, because when you have your microphone where the eardrum is, there is some effect of putting it there. And that's where we have these things called the free field response and diffuse field response of a dummy head, of a microphone in the eardrum position in a dummy head. So the free field response is where a sound source is placed in front of the dummy head in an environment with no reflections, and the response of the microphone is measured with that source directly in front. And the diffuse field is where you have sounds propagating in all equal directions, and the response is measured then. So these are really useful tools for a headphone engineer, because we can then measure the headphone or the earphone, and we can compensate the curve with this diffuse field response or the free field response, and then we can see what is the response of the headphone minus this effect of having a microphone in a dummy head. So then we can look at a curve which shows us really how the headphone is responding. But there are some flaws to this, to the diffuse field or free field response, if we use that in such a way. One is that neither is really showing a normal environment. We don't listen or record sounds in either a completely free or diffuse field environment. Also, if you buy a dummy head and you have a diffuse field response for that dummy head, okay, it's fine for that dummy head, but everybody in this room has a different head, so we all have a different response ourselves. So that's why that's only part of the picture. The other big thing I'll just briefly say, and that's something I think we're going to explore a lot in this conversation, is it's only showing the effect of having a microphone in the head. The big deal for us is that audio is recorded to be played back on loudspeakers. Loudspeakers are placed in a room where the room has an effect. We have two speakers that cross-talk, so one speaker talks to both ears, the other speaker speaks to both ears. This doesn't happen in a headphone. The other thing is we feel vibrations that are born through our bodies. This doesn't happen when we listen to headphones. So these three reasons, and other reasons as well, mean that the diffuse field response or free field response is only half of the picture. And these are many reasons why it's a complex situation to come to an ideal target curve for a headphone.
Thank you, Rowan. So we have the situation where people are used to figuring out how these heads respond and measuring headphones on heads in a way that's not related to speakers, and which then begs the question is, well, should headphones sound like speakers, or should there be something different? And how do we go about probing what the right answer for that is? And so I'm going to turn it over to Paul, because that's exactly what he and one of his colleagues are sort of working in parallel in he used to be a colleague. They work separately now, but they they have a common audio genome that causes their work to be similar. But anyway, Paul, could you tell us a little bit about how you're probing to find what the right target curve is and what we're trying to model?
Yes. Let me lay some of the background. Is this on?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'll get it.
Hello?
Yep.
Let me just lay out some of the background. My career has been mostly based on loudspeakers in rooms. And PSB is the company that really seeded a lot of the activities that went on in Canada back in the early 70s. And a lot of papers have been written in conjunction with the research that went on in loudspeakers at the National Research Council in Ottawa, where I do all of my development. And one of the projects that we did early on, and Sean Olive, who we just referred to, actually was in this lab at the time doing the psychoacoustic research using double-blind screen listening tests to do EQ in listening rooms. So if you make a speaker have a frequency response that's perfectly flat in a room, most listeners would comment that it has no bass. Because what happens in a room, as you alluded to, is that the room has some influence. And I can generically describe the influence it has based on the normal sound reproduction chain that we all listen to mostly. It isn't the case all the time. But music that is recorded in recording studio is normally recorded and played back in an environment where the speaker is a direct radiating loudspeaker. So almost all direct radiating loudspeakers have omnidirectional output at low frequencies. And as the frequencies get higher, the dispersion becomes narrower and narrower. So when you're listening to a speaker in a room, some of what you hear comes directly from the loudspeaker, so you're hearing its flat response. But some of the energy you hear, depending on the reverberant field and the distance you are into the reverberant field relative to the direct sound, you get a combination of what we call the sound power of the loudspeaker, all the energy the speaker's putting out in 360 degrees at all frequencies, which, by the way, on a direct radiating loudspeaker that is flat on axis, the sound power is typically, this being low frequency, is typically tilted. So that what you're actually listening to in a room with a direct radiating loudspeaker is a transfer function which has a tilt on it. So we did a lot of research and came up with the subjective conclusions that people had when we modified or made a speaker flat in a room and gave the listeners the ability to modify it until they felt that the sound reproduction had the right spectrum. And so when I developed headphones, knowing that this is what happens with loudspeakers in a room, with recordings that were intended to be played back on loudspeakers, all of what I'm telling you doesn't apply when it comes to binaural recordings. But who listens to binaural recordings? Very well. But how many can you find? There aren't a lot. So most people have to default to listening to their favorite songs and music with music that was intended to be recorded on loudspeakers and played back in a room. So why not have the headphone have that transfer function that would happen with a pair of loudspeakers in a perfect room? Well, I think I have that transfer function, which is what Tyll was referring to as the secret sauce. But I can tell you that if you do your homework, you can determine what that is. And it's not just at low frequencies. There's some other things you play with. As a matter of fact, Sean, who Tyll referred to earlier, has written 4 papers on the subject. And he's used diffuse and free field devices and measurement techniques that don't correlate with listener preferences. So listeners don't agree that if you do a free field calibration of a headphone, that it will be the most accurate sound. It turns out that if you doing double blind screen tests, and he's done 4 papers on it, as a matter of fact, at the end of this month is when he's doing the 4th paper. But he's published the abstract, and basically it agrees with the direction that I believe is true, and that is he created transfer functions for people that would give it this room curve, and then he allowed the listeners to actually modify from there as to what their preferences would be at low frequencies and the high frequency balance. And he found that there was on average about a 2 dB boost at low frequencies, more than the room gain curve, and about 1.5 dB at high frequencies, based on the absorption of reflections versus direct sound of a flat loudspeaker in a room. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is that luckily my background is in loudspeakers in rooms, so if we're listening to music that was intended to be played back on a loudspeaker and we want to listen to headphones, it makes sense to apply the transfer function of a room to the headphone. And we call this feature in our brand or product a feature called room feel, which is just the way we've coined the approach that we've taken on headphones.
Thank you, Paul. So now we're looking at how long has the Audio Engineering Society been around? A long time. And how long? Headphones have been around not quite so long, 30 years or so. And so it's taken 30 years for researchers to have the idea and act on it that music reproduction on headphones should sound like speakers in a room.
If the recording was done,
Yep.
if the recording was done to be played back, if it was a binaural recording, then that doesn't
Right.
apply.
But most music is that way. So this
Tom,
so
sorry,
seems simple.
headphones have been around a lot longer than 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the exact number, but I mean, there is a research topic called the missing 6 dB, which has been brought up, I think, more than 50 years ago. And that missing 6 dB was mentioned about the perceived difference between the physical, you could measure the physical pressure, or the pressure in the ear from loudspeakers compared to headphones. And you had to turn up the headphone signal up 6 dB to get the same effect. And people were wondering why that was back then. That was I'm sure that was more than 50 years ago. It's been around a long time, this question.
See, I'm such a noob. So, and I'll add to Paul's comment about the boundary conditions, and I'm fascinated that he found this 2 dB discrepancy and that people wanted a 2 dB increase over what the room is.
Well, that was the average. Some people
Okay.
wanted more, some less.
Okay, but I'm gonna put on my researcher hat, which is really easy to do because it's paper and I could a little blower thing that comes with it. But another thing that's missing from headphones is the chest cavity compression from low frequency information, bone conducted information, sinus cavity compression, and so we don't have the visceral sense of low frequencies on headphones that we have on speakers. And I would pose that the reason why people want a little bit more than they would have in a room would be because you're also missing some of this visceral information. One of the things that has been talked about here a little bit, and Rowan hasn't talked about it, but I'm sure I could drag some of this out of him, is a lot of this research is done by asking people what they like. And you're going to get a wide variety of answers, and you can find the middle or the average, but there's a variety of answers that come with that. And I think I'd like to ask I think I'd like to ask you about how Sony is considering their line of headphones that is very, very broad.
Yes, let me talk about our strategy for this sound quality of the headphones. And we look at the headphone as a sound field simulator. And so one of these, the final purpose is, so actually the Paul said, mentioned about in the previous discussion. Yeah, there is some boost on the low end frequency, and due to room condition or the any other effect coming from the environment. And but we always look at this environment. What kind of environment is good for the listeners? And for example, so I will always talk like this. And so when you're, please imagine you are in this musical hall, and so people also are playing in the music at a very high volume, very loud in the stage, and so you are listening at the very best audience spot. So and musicians listen to our music in a very loud volume, and so they listen to the music instruments very closer, and so probably the sound is more distinct in a live stage. But so what you're listening at the audience seat is what you get is more you will perceive more reflection from this in addition to the direct sound from this musical in this instrument, because of this wall, ceiling, or this floor. And so this is so which is the more ideal feel to listen to the music. It depends on so music your style to involved in your music. So if you're a musician, you probably say you want to listen to the music in closer, louder, and more distinct. And so if you are average audio listeners, so in this case, probably you will like the sound with a full ambience. And probably many of the high-end audio people like the second opinion. So that's the difference. Therefore, also one of these be a good, great consideration or this discussion happens in here. Therefore, so Sony is traditionally have two different simulated sound field, which is sound field for hi-fi audio people and also as musicians. And also, sound loudness is also a big factor that affects this perception of the human being. And so probably, so you listen when you listen to a small volume, so you may compensate. You want to compensate this so lower frequency and high frequency simultaneously. But when you're also listening to music in a loud volume, you will prefer more flat response. That's all right.
Now, if I could ask, and to make sure I am understanding you correctly, so it's Sony, when they have pro products or consumer products or products in different categories,
Yes.
that you have different responses that you're looking for depending on the product category?
Yes, we do.
So, now we get to the bass culture. Tetsuro, having spent some time at Skull Candy, I'm interested in knowing what the target curve desire was there, and was there a relationship and an understanding of how to make that but do it very well. And if you could just talk a little bit about, now we're talking about an extreme, essentially an extreme group and a company who's entirely focused on that narrow demographic of that type of listener.
You mean the narrow demographic?
I'm
Meaning
just
the
curious.
bass heads?
Yeah, I'm wondering what the dialogue was like, and how you pursued a good sound.
Yeah. So it's a complicated subject, but I can make some statements. As Paul mentioned, Sean Olive published some papers, and one of the papers' result was pretty interesting. He compared 6 popular headphones, right? And he didn't disclose the. He did disclose the name of the headphones, but when he published the data, he didn't really say which one sounded best, which one sounded worst. But as an acoustical engineer, I could tell which one is which by just looking at the frequency response curves. So unfortunately, probably everybody knows, but there is no strong correlation between sound quality and the popularity of headphones. everybody can agree with that.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, yeah. I like to know how many of you are actually headphone engineers in this audience. Just one, two, three. Okay. Wow. So I'm glad I got very positive reactions from pretty much all of you.
Just can I just make a quick comment based
Sure.
on my experience, which ties into what you're saying, and that is, Sean basically made a statement in his paper that indicated that there was little agreement amongst the headphone community as to what was the right sound. And boy, does that ever remind me of what speakers were like back in the 70s when I first approached NRC. No two speakers sounded alike, but nowadays they tend to be more consistent and more true to what the intention of the musicians and the producers were produced. But the headphone companies don't seem to have come to agreement on that level, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about Bose and Skull Candy, but to the level that I cannot, I don't get sued by both companies. Right. I understand for some people, both headphones or both brands give you a perception that, they are bass boomy. But as an acoustical engineer, we always listen to just wide varieties of music. But I didn't listen to hip hop when I was at Bose. I listened to classical music more. But when I went to Skull Candy, I stopped listening to my classical music and I started listening to hip hop. So that was the biggest difference. But I did try to shoot for a few dB more bass energy when I designed Skull Candy headphones. And that's really what market wanted. And before I joined the company, the brand was already established. And I really couldn't, it was too dangerous to change the culture too drastically. So I analyzed a bunch of headphones, Skull Candy headphones, and also competitors' headphones, including Beats. And Skull Candy headphones had just too much variations in the bass level. If you look at 1 kilohertz energy and like 50 hertz energy and 1 kilohertz energy, and you look at the difference. Some of the headphones had like 5 dB and 10 dB. The most extreme was like 15 dB. And looking at other competitors, same issues, but some of them had like 20 dB. So I said, well, that's a little too much. And Skull Candy was trying to establish the brand as a technically credible company. So I ended up adding a little bit more bass than Bose, but still throughout all kinds of music, including classical music and hip hop, I made sure that all of the music sound pretty good and very good. But let me just emphasize, as in my last statement, that it is almost impossible. I think I can say that it is impossible to use one headphone target curve to satisfy all our customers' need, because our customers listen to varieties of music. And comparing to a high dynamic classical music versus highly compressed hip hop, just one target curve doesn't seem to work. So that's what I learned.
Thanks, Tets. I'm going to throw it back to Rowan here because they did some interesting research at Philips about about demographic groups and preferred sound curves. What did you find there, Rowan?
Yeah. Well, let me just come back to something Tet said first, and then I'll move on to that. I found it interesting that you talked about different genres of music, because for me, it shouldn't matter what is the genre of music. We just try to. It should always be our prerogative to reproduce what the producer wanted it to sound like, or what the artist wanted it to sound like. And so it doesn't matter if it's classical music or hip-hop music, because the producer will have set the bass level or whatever to what he wanted it to sound like. And if we make something which is designed to play back what the producer wanted it to sound like, then we're doing our job. If we say that our products should do that. I mean, I find it perfectly reasonable for us to have bass headphones if they are labeled like that, because there are always going to be people who disagree with producers and say, hey, I wish every producer in the world would turn the bass up. Some people are like that, and okay, they're like that, and we can make headphones for them. It's not my style. I would prefer to listen to a headphone or speakers that reproduce what the producer wanted it to sound like. How to do that is a difficult thing, and that's what Tyll was coming on to. So we already had some idea of what a headphone should sound like, what our target curve should be, from some of the things I spoke about earlier, those reasons. But some of those reasons are a little bit hard to quantify, like the effect of the room. Well, what room? Everybody listens to in different rooms. Like the effect of vibrations born through the body that we don't get through headphones. Well, that is something that's quite difficult to quantify, and there's still research going on in that area. So for that reason, we set up some consumer tests to help us to understand what people like to hear and how that compared to what we thought they wanted to hear. So we made some software with an interface, touchscreen with a square grid that somebody could move around a dot or marker on that grid, and that would change the equalization of the headphones. So if they moved it to one end, it would have more bass-heavy sound. One end would be more bright sound, and the other axis would be controlling how much mid-range there was. So they'd have a lot of control over what exactly they wanted. We got 200 consumers in Paris and 200 consumers in Shanghai to do this test. They were all regular headphone users. And we asked them to listen to one track that we had chosen, and we asked them to listen to another track of their choice from some other tracks that we had given them a list of. And we asked them to listen to each track twice. And after they had listened to the track once and they had moved the thing around to where they wanted it to be to sound good, we flipped the axes of the grid so that the bright sound and powerful sound was randomly moved to another corner. And so we could check if they were just picking something at random, or if they picked the same area twice, then we gave more weight to their score. And so after these tests, we got a better idea of what people had as their preferred sound target curve. And there's some interesting things that came out of that. One is that there was pretty big variation. That variation wasn't region specific, so people in Paris and people in Shanghai don't have, a certain taste that is specific to that region. There was big variation that was the same. That region was diverse in both areas. But there was a kind of common area, so that the area of the grid that had the highest frequency of subjects choosing it was pretty close to where we thought it would be in theory, perhaps slightly higher in bass and slightly higher at very high frequencies as well. So it kind of checked out with what we wanted, but yeah, it did have variation. That's for sure.
And isn't one of the product lines from Philips one square over from what that was found to be?
Yeah, so like I said, we have some headphones that we target for people who might prefer to have more bass than the average listener, and we show that on our packaging. We say this is a bass-heavy headphone.
Okay, so we've had a good bit of talk here, and I'd like to open it to some questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions about this? Sure, Tets, go ahead.
Bone conduction. So I'm researcher, so I just like to be precise. So
Yeah.
a couple of people talked about bone conduction, but I could be wrong. But from my experience, bone conduction is like bone. It's 30 to 40 dB level lower. So if your eardrum is hearing, say, 80 dB of sound pressure, the effect of bone conduction path could be only like 40 dB. So I don't think we should consider about that unless I don't know.
And what about nasal cavity and chest cavity compression? Audibility?
That part I do not know. But when I was working on noise cancellation headphone, it's typical that we put ourselves in a noisy environment, and that's we evaluate the performance of noise cancellation headphones, right?
Mhm.
So of course, that takes into account all of the transmission path, including our torso, head, and nose, right? So and we didn't think it was a big issue. So I just like to comment on that.
Sure. Paul, yeah.
Could I speak to something related to that, and that is the lack of tactile feeling. There was a paper presented, which I had fortunate to attend in Rome back in May of this year. And there was a guy he actually won a golden award for this paper, and he had done experiments with listeners playing music that was played in a church, where they would normally be sitting in the pews. So he put accelerometers on the pews and actually measured the level of vibration of the pew when music was being played. So he took this musical information and played it back on headphones and put a shaker. And he was able to, first he measured the thresholds for all the individuals for where they could start feeling vibration. And he added 1 dB more energy, which if you were sitting in the seat with the shaker, you wouldn't even actually feel it. It was just at threshold. And when he did subjective evaluations with listeners, the listeners' scores went up when the chair was vibrating, even though they didn't know it was. But what was interesting is he also took noise at low frequencies and excited the chair that had nothing to do with the music at low frequencies, and the scores also went up. So it means that you can probably just add some energy at low frequencies, and it's enough for people to get that tactile feeling, and it doesn't matter whether it's perfectly synchronized with music. So anyway, I just thought I'd comment. There's a lot, like you were saying, there's a lot of research going on, and I find it all very fascinating. In fact, I'm doing more research on the measurement side of things, because any of us who've done measurements on dummy heads and trying to profile what a headphone's actually doing or what's happening at the eardrum of a typical ear canal.
Paul, I have a question. Just to clarify, do you think that added sensation, vibration sensation, can actually replace that added bass energy?
No. No, because the room still has the EQ that's there. So I think you still have to put the transfer function that the room filter of the room adds. And as you were saying earlier, we'd like to think that we're reproducing music on headphones and loudspeakers in rooms, in my case, that is representative of what the producers or the musicians decided they wanted. And the speaker or the headphone is just the window through which you're seeing the acoustical event. And sure, you can tint the glass, and sometimes when we put on tinted glasses, everything's more spectacular, but it's not natural. And you can always add the tint. It's really hard to take the tint away and see the natural color. So that optical analogy is kind of how I try and communicate what our role should be, and that is to be true to being a clear window through which you see the acoustical event, whether it's a speaker or a headphone.
I'd like to add one more thing. This is what I call sensational linearity. And I'm sorry if you're not a fan of skull candy. Are you familiar with the skull crusher? That things vibrates on your head? Anybody? Few people are familiar. So, thank you. So we refreshed that design a few months ago, and it's on the market. So if you're interested in, please take a listen. But let's talk about sensational linearity. So it's related to what we just talked about. Let's say you're listening to loudspeakers in a room, you crank up the volume all the way up. I don't know, some systems can go up maybe 100, 110, 120. But what happens is at the lower level, you don't feel the vibration. But some level, your genes started vibrating. You started feeling some additional pressure. So that's what I call linearity. But with the headphone, you don't get that, right? Because especially if it's closed can, you get pretty good high sound pressure level pretty easily, right? So you get high frequency pretty loud, and you get low frequency pretty loud, but you don't get anything. So does it make sense? That's what I call nonlinearity. So I think the paper Paul mentioned is very interesting. I like to read that, but I think that's very related to what I experienced from the skull crusher development.
So we're going to have to wrap it up here because it's half past is the proper time, but we're a tad over. So I'm curious, really just a yes or a no, and if you disagree or agree, a short comment why. Do you fundamentally think that good headphones should sound like good speakers in a good room? Paul?
Yeah, that's what I said earlier. So
Okay, good. I'm just doing a reality
Okay.
check down the line here.
Okay.
So that's okay.
Yeah.
Naotaka?
So my opinion is half the way yes, half the way no. And so since they are our headphone is dedicated truly for the art, so including the music, movies, or sometimes the computer games. Therefore, also what we need to consider is to deliver soul or something, the idea that the creators have to transfer to the audience ear. That is the most important issue. Therefore, that's the reason why I half the way yes, half the way no.
Yeah, in fact, I was talking to Tets at breakfast this morning, and one of the interesting things is that the people who design games and sounds in games, they really are. They're not thinking about good speakers in good rooms. A lot of times they're listening on headphones or desktop speakers. Or
they much care about this about good speakers, good room, because they also probably for example, we have Sony Pictures Entertainment in a group, and so there is a very famous good sounding room which is called Cary Grant Theater in Culver City, California. So they are always talking about it, how our room acoustic is good, and also the sound system is sophisticated. Yeah.
Thank you. Rowan?
Well, basically, yes, I agree with the statement. We should normally tune our headphones so that they reproduce at the listener's ears what the producer or artist wanted people to hear, which was originally intended to be heard in loudspeakers in a room. So yes, in general, but there can be exceptions, and in those exceptions, we need to clearly tell that to the consumer before they buy the product.
And Tets?
Answer is yes right now, but could be no in the future. Meaning, really the headphone market is just like, as you said, it's infantry stage. I agree with that. And I think, yes, first of all, we should understand what we are doing. We should know what we are doing. That's the first step. But I think at the same time, there are more and more tools available for music producer and gaming audio producer. And more people have access to those things. So that means I think there will be more possibly confusions from the music material side. And the way they produce the music could be changing very fast. We talked about it, a lot of people nowadays listening to one speaker. maybe very few. Not maybe listening to stereo speakers, maybe a minority thing. I don't know, but those things could be changing very fast, and I think headphone community should be adopting to that change very fast.
But then we have to make agreements between each other to make that happen. I mean, just a very quick point. I really agree with what you say, but if producers or game producers are going to make sound designed for headphones, then they need to know what headphones are going to do to that. So it means that we as headphone producers need to agree with ourselves and decide what is the right curve.
We should do a transfer function of the headphone the guy who did the game did. So we need to know what headphone he used, and then we can make a target function for his game.
Well, it's
But
a bit
that
chicken in
doesn't
the
seem
egg.
to
like
make,
that.
that's not good science, by the way. That's just stumbling along trying to keep up.
And this is the beginning of a conversation where things probably get.
Can I add something to your comment? And actually, but we need to know all the creators don't most of these also creators don't are satisfied with this current sound system. Therefore, why I say this? How do we know is we want to we want to know what is the real demand for those creators. That we need to know. That's why we are how do we know? Because due to our current loudspeaker don't reproduce everything. That's the point.
So I want to thank everybody. I'm gonna have to cut it off because we're out of time. I want to thank all these gentlemen up here. I want to also say that I've been listening to headphones for a long time and have listened to recent offerings from all of these gentlemen. And I believe the quality of all these headphones are coming together more closely. The headphones are less disparate in their character. And I include Tet's offerings and designs from Skullcandy because I thought while they were bass-heavy headphones, they were better than the Skullcandy headphones that had come previously. So I want to congratulate all these gentlemen and say that all your efforts have made headphones sound better, and as a sort of impartial observer, they are sounding closer and closer together in a place that I think is a pretty darn good sound. So thank you all very much. Thank you very much.